Like most major towns and cities in Britain, Southampton has undergone a great many changes during the 20th century. Fortunately, however, many of the city's important civic events, a good deal of its pre-war architecture and fashions of the past, have been captured on film. Perhaps you remember Southampton's last tram parading through the city in 1949. The Queen Mary, one of Southampton's best-loved ships. Or Sir Sidney Kimber. Or maybe you recall the early days at Southampton Eastleigh Airport and the visit of the Duke and Duchess of York, who opened the Royal Show in 1932. Some of the city's historic background was documented in this early railway promotional film.
Southampton, gateway to England and gateway to the world. A description that remains as true today as when Norman hands laid stone upon stone to form this imposing gateway. It marks, as it were, the very entrance to their newly won province of England. Before Norman, Saxon, and before Saxon, Roman, each in their turn knew this place. They came as conquerors, but each in turn disappeared in the tide of time. When it was our turn to play the role of invader, through this gateway went Henry V and 12,000 Englishmen to find immortal glory on the field of Agincourt. 5 centuries have passed, and with their passing, many a town has risen to know greatness, only to sink back once more into oblivion. But not Southampton. The passing years serve as so many milestones by which to mark and follow her path to present-day greatness. To those of us who don't know her particularly well, Southampton is merely a place of luxurious arrival and departure for the great and near great, which of course includes film stars. But to these types, it's home, and a jolly good one at that, not to mention the other odd 176,000 who also live here. The old and the new. Here to discover one without the other is impossible. So let's go back to the old. When the Normans seized the town, the first thing they did was to make sure that they'd get a good night's sleep, so they built these massive walls and watchtowers to keep out all comers. In those days, the water at high tide came well up these walls. This fine modern roadway was a stretch of shingle then, much in favor with the town's fishermen. The beach at this point, as the records show, was used as a place of arrival and embarkation. This inscription commemorates a departure made on the 15th day of August, 1620. By 102 brave souls, later to become known as the Pilgrim Fathers, who were destined after 67 perilous days at sea in the Mayflower to be the founders of the New England states of America. As these figures show, the Mayflower was little more than a cockleshell, and we can only marvel at the courage and daring of those who sailed in her. The 15th day of August, 1620. A lucky day for England.
Despite its modern appearance, the city's civic centre was opened in 1932, and to perform the opening ceremony, Southampton was host to the Duke and Duchess of York. The new centre, designed by E. Berry Webber, was built on the site of the Westmarlands Park and eventually incorporated the Guildhall, library and art gallery. Although officially open, the imposing clock tower, now a familiar landmark, was yet to be completed. Despite being heavily bombed during World War II, the Civic Centre survived, although major repairs were needed. After the opening ceremony, the royal party continued to the Southwestern Hotel, now Southwestern House, for lunch, after which they inspected the new Western Docks. The Royal Pier, once very accessible to the people of Southampton, saw the start of the 1933 Carnival, a traditional event which remains a feature of the city today. Each year, thousands of Southtonians line the streets to watch the spectacular floats and the regular traffic grinds to a halt. Unlike today, however, in 1933, trams made an excellent vantage point as the procession passed through the junction of Above Bar and New Road, the original location of the clock tower, moved 2 years later to Bitton Park Triangle. Other attractions were to be found on Southampton Common. They included a demonstration by the fire brigade. And a traditional fair. These early vehicles were proudly displayed as veterans, even though at the time few were more than 30 years old. That'd be rather like a parade of Cortinas today. William Craven Ellis was local MP for Southampton during the 1930s and 40s. His daughter Doris, consequently, had access to a number of significant civic events, which she had the foresight to record on film. They included her father's election campaign of 1931, in which he was running as a candidate for the national government, which had come about as a result of the Depression. Some of the electioneering took place in Queen's Park, opposite Dockgate 4. Railways played an important role in the development of Southampton. The London and South Western Railway opened its line to the town in 1839, which eventually led to the railway company owning and expanding the docks. During wartime, both docks and railway were stretched to their limits with the movement of troops and supplies in and out of the port. These American-built locomotives were bound for Europe in readiness for an invasion which eventually came in 1944. Some 40 years before, Lord Kitchener departed from Southampton's West Station on his return from South Africa in 1902, at the end of the Boer War. Many of those who worked in central Southampton lived in nearby Woolston and beyond, which was linked across the Itchen River by the floating bridge chain ferry. The ferry was of equal importance to those who travelled to Woolston for work. The Thornycroft shipyard was one of the main employers, producing both merchant and naval vessels. Launches were always special occasions, enjoyed by workers and invited guests alike. HMS Yapton first slipped into the water in 1932. There goes another one. The great liners of the world became part of the everyday scenery of Southampton, with shipping lines carrying over 500,000 people a year through the port during the 1930s. In 1932, the Mauretania was the first liner to berth alongside the new Western docks. The two white vessels in the foreground, by the way, were brand new launches, about to start work as tenders for Saunders Row, the flying boat builders. The elegant Mauretania made weekly transatlantic crossings, at this time in conjunction with her running mates, Berengaria and Aquitania. The Aquitania was considered by many to be the last of the real four funnelers. 5 years after her completion, Cunard moved her from their Liverpool service, and Southampton became her home port. She remained in service until 1949 and finally left for the breakers in February 1950. From Town Quay, the huge floating dock became another familiar sight for about 10 years, until it moved to Portsmouth in 1934. These pictures were taken by an unknown Frenchman who came to Southampton for the day on October the 30th, 1930. The flag on the Southwestern Hotel is flying at half-mast out of respect for the R101 disaster. The ball beneath it, incidentally, was hoisted to the top of the mast each day and electronically released at exactly 10 a.m. as a time signal by which the townsfolk set their watches. Trams first came to the town in 1879, initially as horse-drawn vehicles. They were later superseded by electric versions during 1900, forming the basis of Southampton's public transport system, with routes emanating to most residential areas and connecting the docks and town centre. One route, after going up the high street, actually passed through the bar gate, although for this, special modified tram cars had to be used. Alongside the trams, various routes were operated by motor buses, such as this service down Lances Hill, in the days when the houses here still had front gardens. Sometimes trams would reach 35 miles per hour down the avenue. In anticipation of Britain's largest liner, the Queen Mary, the Southern Railway Company commissioned the building of the King George V dry dock, which was opened by His Majesty on the 26th of July, 1933. After the ceremony, the royal party continued on their way to Cowes aboard the royal yacht Victoria and Albert. Sadly, the King died before the initial arrival of RMS Queen Mary 3 years later, and following the abdication of Edward, the Duke and Duchess of York became King and Queen in 1937. After their state visit to Canada and the United States, the royal couple arrived in Southampton aboard the Empress of Britain. Captured here on very rare colour footage, seemingly all of Southampton turned out to greet them on their route through the town to the civic centre. Spot the deliberate mistake on this period caption. Sir Sidney Kimber's public duties spanned an incredible 40 years. He first became mayor in 1918 and was later behind such projects as Southampton's Cenotaph, Sports Centre and Civic Centre. In 1938, on giving up captaincy of the borough cricket team after 26 years, he was presented with a statuette at the Sports Centre. Another pre-war development was that of the General Hospital's new maternity wing, which was opened by Mayor Harry Chick. And in 1937, Lord Derby arrived in Southampton, met by the mayor and the official car, sporting that famous TR1 number plate. He was whisked to the Guildhall, where he performed the building's official opening. Southampton played a key role during the pioneering days of aviation, with historic moments such as the first flight of the Spitfire and the development of an airplane factory in Hamble by A.V. Rowe, the first Englishman to fly. In 1932, Bert Hinkler, who lived in Bitton, arrived back in Southampton after his epic flight across the South Atlantic, setting a record for the longest non-stop flight in a light aircraft. The following year, Southampton Corporation announced plans to establish Southampton Eastleigh Airport at North Stoneham, which would forge a link with the Channel Islands. Meanwhile, flying boats had become a familiar sight on Southampton water. As early as 1928, Imperial Airways played its part in promoting Southampton Shopping Week, with short trips aboard their Calcutta-class aircraft from the Royal Pier. One of the largest flying boats to ever come to the area was the Dornier DOX, which was moored off Kelshot in December 1930. This massive 12-engine machine stopped for refueling on its way from Germany to the United States. During the stopover, the Prince of Wales went aboard and tried his hand at the controls on a short flight. Flying boats remained part of the local scenery, operated by Aquila Airways and BOAC until 1958. The grounds of Hamble Cliff House, formerly the Hardwick Estate, underwent considerable changes in 1936 when the land was purchased by the British Marine Aircraft Company for the production of flying boats. The factory later became known as Follens, and more recently Aerostructures Hamble, producing modern aviation components. The houses on the Cliff Road estate, originally built for the workers, still remain as private dwellings. Mrs. Baldwin, wife of the Prime Minister, made a visit to the area in 1933 as a guest of honor at a local fete, just one of many held in the town every year. They offered the opportunity for everyone to don their Sunday best and enjoy a social occasion. In some cases, such as at this fete at Bitton, mini pageants were organized for the amusement of both parents and children alike. One of Southampton's biggest events was the Royal Show, held on the Common. And for the second time in 1932, the Duke and Duchess of York came to the town. Cricket is something of a tradition in Southampton, the game having originated in Hampshire at Hambledon. Since 1885, the Northlands Road ground has been headquarters for the Hampshire County Club. The stadium behind the club was another popular sporting venue, with both motorcycle and greyhound racing taking place regularly. And if that wasn't enough, the Trojans Rugby Club has long been established, seen here at their home ground in Stoneham, with the airport in the background. The club later moved to the other side of Wide Lane when the Ford Motor Company built its new factory. Southampton Football Club, with its familiar red and white strip, has drawn crowds at the Dell for decades. In 1929, the original stadium burned down and was replaced by the building seen in this clip from 1946. Do you remember Mallet, Smith, Charlie Wayman, or how about good old Alf Ramsey? They all played here, and the club incidentally was in League Division 2. Well done, lads. Got one at last. They may have been able to continue with football at the Dell, but the big freeze of 1947 brought much of the country to a standstill. But it did have its compensations. By contrast, these rural scenes of harvesting near Botley have all the atmosphere of those long summer days we all seem to remember from childhood. This was an era when horsepower was about to give way to mechanical means of farming. Further modernization, this time of the public transport system, was also afoot. On December the 31st, 1949, after nearly 50 years of electric trams, Southampton's last tram was paraded through the town. And for the last time, trams trundled across the central bridge towards the Itchen to connect with the floating bridge. Fortunately, however, at least one of the area's features from the past survives. The narrow-gauge railway on Hythe Pier remains in operation, taking commuters and tourists the length of the pier, to and from the ferry, to this day. As in previous centuries, the port of Southampton continued to thrive, a unique double tide and deep water channel providing ideal conditions for all types of craft, from the red funnel paddle steamers to the world's largest liners. Thanks to filmmakers of the time, we can look back with nostalgia to an era before air travel, to Southampton in the past. If you've enjoyed Southampton in the past, you may be interested in Portsmouth and Southsea in the past, another title in the Places in the Past series.